Hey everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. So today we are going to be diving deep into something that I think is super fascinating. The science behind how habits form. Just think about it for a sec. From brushing your teeth every morning to, constantly checking our phones, so much of what we do on a daily basis is actually driven by habits.
It really is amazing how much of our lives are run by habits.
Yeah, and you know what's even more amazing is, and we've got all this great research from Psychology Today, positivepsychology.com, stuff from James Clear's website, and even some heavy-duty medical journals from UCL and Noble Magazine. So much good stuff here. And all these sources pretty much agree that almost half of what we do every day is basically like ruled by these subconscious patterns, like our brains are on autopilot.
It's true, and you know that autopilot mode, that's really the secret sauce to habits. They free up our minds to focus on other things. Like, can you imagine if you had to consciously think about every single step of getting dressed in the morning or making breakfast?
Right, like first I pick up the shirt, then I put my arm through the sleeve.
Exactly, you'd be exhausted before you even started your day.
Totally. But then how do we even define what a habit is? Is it just something you do a lot? Or like every day?
Well, it's a bit more specific than that. Think about buckling your seatbelt in the car.
Yeah, okay.
You just do it without even thinking, right? It's triggered by getting in the car. That's the real definition of a habit. It's an automatic action that's tied to a specific cue.
Oh, so it's not just about how often you do something, but about how automatic it is and how much it's tied to a specific trigger. Huh, that's really interesting. And I was looking through some of James Clear's work earlier, and he talks about this habit loop. Can you break that down for us a little bit?
Absolutely. The habit loop is basically a cycle with 4 parts. So it all starts with a cue, which is basically like a signal, something that triggers the habit. Then comes the craving, a desire for the reward that comes with the habit. Then you have the response, which is the actual habit itself, the action you take. And finally, you've got the reward, which is that satisfying feeling that kind of strengthens the connection between the cue and the response.
Okay, so let me see if I get this straight. So let's say you have a habit of snacking while you're watching TV.
Okay, yeah, good example.
So the cue would be turning on the TV, right?
Exactly. And the craving would be for something tasty to munch on while you're watching. The response, of course, is you grabbing those snacks and eating them. And the reward is that enjoyment of the flavor and the feeling of satisfaction, maybe even relaxation it brings. And the more you repeat this loop, the stronger that connection becomes in your brain, and the harder it can be to resist, even if you know it's not the healthiest habit.
Wow, so it's like, in a way, our brains are constantly learning and adapting to these patterns. Is that where this whole idea of neuroplasticity comes in?
You got it. Neuroplasticity is basically this incredible ability our brains have to change and rewire themselves based on what we experience. You can almost think of it like, building a path in the woods. The more you walk that same path, the easier it becomes to follow. It's the same with our brains. The more we repeat a habit, the stronger those neural pathways become. But, and here's the really cool part, we can actually use this to our advantage and intentionally create positive habits through what we call self-directed neuroplasticity.
So wait, we're not just stuck with whatever habits we've already developed. We can actually change things and even create new, healthier habits.
You absolutely can. It's amazing, really. You have way more control over your brain than you probably think. It's like you're the architect of your own brain's pathways. You get to choose which ones you want to make stronger and which ones you kind of want to let fade away.
That is pretty powerful stuff, actually.
Right. And one of the most powerful tools we have for doing this, for shaping those pathways, is by actually paying attention to how those habits make you feel, really noticing.
So you're saying if I want to change a habit, I need to become more aware of it.
Exactly. Awareness is key. Journaling can be a great way to do this, by actually writing down your actions and the feelings they create. You're basically bringing those habits up to the surface, making them visible, right?
Like shining a light on those things we usually do on autopilot.
Exactly. And then you can start to see the connections, right? The connection between the cue, the craving, the response, and the reward. And then you can ask yourself, is this reward actually serving me? Is it helping me be the person I want to be?
It's like we're becoming detectives of our own minds.
I like that. It's not just about trying harder or just using willpower. It's about really understanding the process and then working with our brains instead of fighting against them.
Right. Because our brains are pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Speaking of understanding the process, one of the things that I feel like trips a lot of people up is this idea that it takes 21 days to form a new habit. I mean, I've definitely seen that quote floating around all over the place. But is it actually true? Does it really just take 3 weeks?
Well, not exactly. The research from UCL actually found that it takes an average of 66 days to form a new habit, not 21.
Oh, wow. So more than double that.
Yeah. And even that 66 days is just an average. It can really vary from person to person and even from habit to habit. Sometimes it can take much, much longer. So it's important to remember that. Be patient and persistent.
Okay, so this is more like a marathon, not a sprint.
Right. It's a journey.
So then how can we actually set ourselves up for success on this, habit-building journey? What are some things that people can start doing, like today, to help them make those changes?
One of the most important things is to start small. Don't try to change everything about your life overnight. Just pick one small habit that you really want to change and focus on that.
So instead of being like, I'm going to totally overhaul my entire diet starting right now, maybe I just focus on drinking more water every day.
Exactly. Small changes are much more sustainable and way less overwhelming. Another great strategy is what we call habit stacking. This is basically where you attach a new habit to an existing one.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued. Tell me more about that. What's an example of habit stacking?
Okay, let's say you want to start meditating for 5 minutes every morning. But instead of trying to create a whole new routine from scratch, try just adding it to something you already do consistently, like brushing your teeth. So after you brush your teeth, you just sit down and meditate for a few minutes. That way you're basically using an existing cue, that brushing your teeth, to trigger the new habit.
Oh, that's really smart. It's like sneaking in a good habit on the coattails of one you've already got.
Exactly.
And that actually ties back to that whole habit loop, doesn't it?
It does. You're basically creating that strong connection between the cue, craving, response, and reward, but in a way that supports your goals.
It's like we're hacking our own brains.
Exactly. We're using the science of how habits work to our advantage.
This is so fascinating. And it's really making me think about all those little things I do every day in a totally new way. It's not just random stuff. It's actually the result of all these really complex processes happening in my brain.
Yeah.
And what's even more cool is that we can use this knowledge to actually create positive changes. This has been such an awesome deep dive so far, but I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of this whole topic.
Oh, we definitely have a lot more to cover. It really is amazing, right, how much power we have over shaping our own lives just by understanding how habits work. It's like we're not just along for the ride, we're actually in the driver's seat.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And it makes me think, before we get too far down the road here, we keep talking about habits, but a lot of the articles we've been looking at also mention routines. And I'm wondering, is there a difference between a habit and a routine? What's the distinction there?
That's a great question, and you're right. People often use those terms interchangeably, but there is a subtle but important difference. So think about it this way. You might have a morning routine, right? Maybe you make your bed, do some stretching, have a cup of coffee, whatever it is. But you still have to, think about it, right? You have to put in some effort to make it happen. A habit, on the other hand, is something you do automatically without even thinking about it, like brushing your teeth.
Right, yeah. I don't have to tell myself, okay, now pick up the toothbrush, now put toothpaste on it.
Exactly, it just happens. So a routine is something you do consciously, while a habit is more subconscious and automatic.
So how does a routine actually become a habit then? What's that process like?
It all comes down to repetition and reward. The more you consistently perform those actions in a specific context and experience some kind of positive outcome, the more automatic they become. Your brain starts to connect those cues, like waking up in the morning, with the reward, which might be feeling more alert and energized after your routine.
It's like those actions get linked together in our brains, and eventually we just do them without thinking.
Yeah, they become hardwired.
Oh, and that makes me think about James Clear's 4 laws of behavior change. He talks a lot about that, right? How to actually make a habit stick.
He does. So his 4 laws are: make it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying.
Okay, let's break those down a bit. So first, making a habit obvious. What does that actually look like?
It's all about those cues we talked about. It's about setting up clear cues in your environment that remind you to do the habit. So let's say you want to start flossing every day, which we should all be doing, but it's hard to remember sometimes.
Tell me about it.
Right. So what you can do is put the floss right next to your toothbrush, right where you can't miss it. Make the cue impossible to ignore.
Oh, so it's like those visual reminders.
Yeah, like little nudges in the right direction.
I like that. Okay, what about making a habit attractive? How do you make something you maybe don't really want to do, appealing?
Well, this is where we can tap into the power of rewards or association. Let's say you want to start exercising more regularly, but you just don't enjoy it.
Yeah, that's me.
Right. A lot of people feel that way. So try pairing your workout with something you really do enjoy, like listening to your favorite music or a podcast you love.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
By linking the two together, you start to look forward to the workout more because you associate it with something pleasurable.
So you're basically giving your brain a little incentive.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm getting this. So then there's making it easy. What does that mean in terms of building habits?
Think about it practically. Like, if you want to eat healthier, the easiest way to do that is to make sure you have healthy food readily available. Right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So keep a bowl of fruit on the counter, pre-chop some veggies for snacks, pack a healthy lunch the night before, whatever works for you. The easier it is to actually make the healthy choice in the moment, the more likely you are to do it.
It's like removing the obstacles, right?
Exactly. Make it the path of least resistance.
I love that. Okay, and then finally we have making the habit satisfying. How do we make sure that reward at the end is actually truly fulfilling? So we want to keep going.
This is where it gets a little deeper because it's really important to try to focus on the intrinsic rewards of the habit, those things that make you feel good on a deeper level, not just superficial stuff. So if you're trying to establish, say, a regular writing habit, don't just focus on the number of words you write, like hitting a certain word count. Instead, really savor that feeling of expressing yourself creatively, or the satisfaction of maybe sharing your ideas with others.
So find that motivation that comes from within, right?
Exactly. Because when you genuinely enjoy the process and those internal rewards it brings, you're way more likely to stick with it over the long haul.
That makes so much sense. And I feel like these 4 laws, they're super helpful for building good habits. But what about breaking bad ones? Is it just the opposite? Like make it invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying? Does that work?
Well, that's a great question. And it would make sense if it were that simple, right?
It would.
But unfortunately, it's not always that easy. Bad habits, by their very nature, usually have some pretty strong rewards associated with them. Whether it's that dopamine rush we get from social media or the temporary stress relief of smoking a cigarette, breaking free from those ingrained patterns, those deep grooves in our brains, can be really tough.
So how do we actually approach breaking bad habits then? If it's not as easy as just flipping the 4 laws, what strategies can we use?
Well, one of the most effective things you can do is to really take some time to identify the specific triggers that set off that habit loop. Like, what are those things that lead you to engage in that behavior? And once you know what those triggers are, you can start to either avoid them or find ways to modify them. So let's say you're trying to stop mindlessly scrolling through social media, which, let's be honest, we've all been there.
Guilty as charged.
Right. It's so easy to get sucked in. But try, turning off those notifications on your phone or even putting your phone in a totally different room for a while so it's not always within reach.
So it's about making it less accessible.
Exactly. You're making it harder for that habit to take over.
That's a great tip. Okay, so we've talked about triggers, but what about those cravings? Sometimes it just feels like they take over your brain completely. It's like you're not even in control. What can you do about that?
Yeah, cravings can be super powerful, for sure. One thing that can help is to find a healthier substitute that provides a similar kind of reward or feeling. Like, if you're craving the sweetness of a sugary drink, maybe try reaching for a piece of fruit instead. Or if you're craving the distraction of social media, try calling a friend or engaging in a hobby you enjoy. You're basically retraining your brain to desire those healthier options.
It's like we're rewiring those pathways, right?
Yeah.
This is all so fascinating. And it's making me realize that this whole process of habit formation, it's really a journey of self-discovery.
It really is. It's about getting to know yourself, your triggers, your cravings, your rewards, and then using that knowledge to actually create real positive change in your life.
That's so powerful.
And remember, breaking a bad habit is a process, not a quick fix. There will inevitably be setbacks and slip-ups along the way. It's totally normal.
So don't beat yourself up if you stumble.
Exactly. Don't let those setbacks derail you. Just acknowledge them, learn from them, and keep moving forward.
It's about progress, not perfection.
Exactly. And I think one of the most important things in this whole journey is self-awareness. Because the more aware you are of your habits, both good and bad, the more power you ultimately have to change them.
Right, so awareness is key. But how do you actually cultivate that self-awareness? How do you become more aware of those habits in the first place if they're so automatic?
Well, this is where mindfulness can be a really powerful tool. Mindfulness is basically about paying attention to your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions in the present moment without any judgment. So like, instead of just mindlessly scrolling through social media, which again, we all do, take a moment to actually notice the urge to do that, the action itself, and then the feeling it creates in you. So becoming more conscious of those automatic patterns, the things we do without even thinking about them.
Exactly. Because by shining a light on those patterns, you can start to really understand them and then make more conscious choices about whether they're truly serving you or not.
It's about taking back control.
It is. And once you have that awareness, you can start to apply all those strategies we've been talking about, the 4 laws of behavior change, finding healthier substitutes, modifying your environment to create real, lasting change.
This is also insightful. I'm starting to see that habit formation isn't just about willpower or forcing yourself to do things you don't want to do. It's really about understanding how your brain works and using that knowledge to design a life that's in alignment with who you are and who you want to be.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's about becoming the architects of our own lives, creating those environments and routines that support our well-being and help us thrive. And speaking of creating lasting change, we have one more part of our deep dive to go. We've covered so much already, but there's still more to explore. Stay tuned as we delve even deeper into this fascinating world of habit formation and uncover the role of reflection in really solidifying those positive changes. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been having such a fascinating conversation about the science of habit formation. And in this final part, we're going to uncover one more really important ingredient for creating lasting change: the power of reflection.
You know, when we talk about this idea of self-directed neuroplasticity, like we were in the last part, it's not just about making changes in the moment, right? It's also about actually taking the time to reflect on those changes, to really let them sink in and become part of who we are, you know, at a deeper level.
So it's not enough to just go through the motions of building a new habit or trying to break an old one. We need to actively think about what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Exactly. Think about it this way. Imagine you're learning to play a musical instrument, right? If you just practice the same scales over and over again, but you never actually stop to listen to yourself, to evaluate how you're doing, to maybe make some adjustments to your technique, you wouldn't improve nearly as quickly. Reflection is like that feedback loop. It helps us fine-tune our habits and make them really stick.
Oh, that's such a good analogy.
Yeah.
So how can we actually make reflection a regular part of our, habit-building journey? I know we've talked about journaling before. Is that a good way to do it?
Journaling can definitely be a fantastic tool for reflection, but it's not just about writing down what you did or didn't do each day, checking things off a list. It's about going a little deeper, asking yourself those tougher questions about your experience. So how did this habit actually make you feel? Did you notice any resistance coming up? What were the specific things that triggered the behavior? What was the reward? And was it actually as satisfying as you thought it would be? By really exploring those questions, you'll gain a much deeper understanding of all those forces that are at play in your habit loop.
It's like we're becoming detectives of our own minds, uncovering those hidden motives and patterns that are driving our actions.
I love that. Yeah, it's an investigation. And I think by writing these things down, it also makes them more concrete, more real in our minds.
It's like you're bringing those subconscious patterns into the light.
Right. Exactly. And, here's a pro tip. Don't just write in your journal and then forget about it, close the book and put it away. Make time to go back and actually revisit those entries on a regular basis, especially the ones about your positive habits, those wins that you've had, because it's like you're giving your brain a little reminder, of those successes, those positive feelings, all those reasons why you're committed to making this change in the first place.
It's like we're strengthening those neural pathways that we were talking about before, making them more resilient to those old patterns that might be trying to creep back in, right?
Exactly. You're reinforcing those new grooves in your brain. And, something else I think is really fascinating about habit formation is the role of context. Habits are often tied to really specific environments or situations.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I definitely have some habits that only seem to pop up when I'm in certain places.
Right. You might have a habit of always snacking when you're watching TV or checking your phone first thing in the morning when you wake up.
Guilty. So are you saying that if we change the context, we might be able to weaken the grip of those, maybe not so healthy habits?
You got it. Let's say you're trying to break that habit of scrolling through social media right before bed because it messes with your sleep. Well, try moving your phone charger to a totally different room so it's not the first thing you see when you wake up in the morning. Or if you're trying to cut back on drinking alcohol, maybe try avoiding those bars or parties where you typically drink.
It's like you're disrupting that automatic association between the context and the behavior. I'm starting to realize that this whole process of habit formation, it's way more complex and nuanced than I ever realized.
It really is. There's so much going on beneath the surface, but that's also what makes it so fascinating. And I think the more we understand these nuances, the more power we have to create real and lasting change.
This deep dive has honestly been such an eye-opening experience. I feel like I have a whole new understanding, not just of how my brain works, but how I can use this knowledge to actually create a life that's more in alignment with who I want to be and the kind of life I want to live.
That's wonderful to hear. And remember, it's not about being perfect or never making mistakes along the way. It's about really embracing that journey of self-discovery and just continually learning and growing.
So well said. As we wrap up this incredible deep dive into the science of habit formation, what's the one key takeaway that you really want listeners to leave with today?
That's a good question. I think the most important thing to remember is this. You have the power to change. Your brain is incredibly adaptable. And with conscious effort, a little bit of patience, and, a healthy dose of self-compassion, you can absolutely shape your habits and break free from those patterns that might be holding you back.
Such an inspiring message. It's so empowering to realize that we're not just creatures of habit. We're also the creators of our habits. We get to choose those habits that will ultimately help us live happier, healthier, and more fulfilling lives. Thank you so much for joining us today on this fascinating journey into the science of habit formation.
It's been a pleasure being here. And for everyone listening out there, just remember, change is possible, one small step at a time. Keep exploring, keep reflecting, and keep creating those habits that will empower you to live your best life.